Tēnā koutou, ko karanga hake te maunga, ko ohini muri te awa, ko tainui te waka, ko Ngāti Tamate rā te iwi, ko te pai o hauraki te marae, no hauraki ahau I te puaki ahau I whanganui, e noho ana ahau ki ahurere. Ko Jase Williams, raua ko Lorraine Kenny o Kumātua, ko Kellyanne Simon tuku ho wahine, ko Simon rātou, ko Casey, ko Jasmine, aku tamariki, ko Isaiah, raua ko Joseph, aku mukapuna, ko Jase Williams tōku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora, my name is Jase. I'm the principal of Henry Hill School, like you heard. As a decent introduction, feel really humbled to be here today to share this kōrero, and just a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm going to share a little bit of my story, and it's very real. So if you're triggered by some of the content in it, make sure you find ways to regulate and calm yourself, and it may be walking away from the screen for a little bit. So anyway, identity is so important. So in my pepeha, I acknowledge the two sides of my whānau, my mother and my father. So I am Māori and I am Irish. Two groups of people who lost their sense of identity, their language, their mana was stripped away from them due to the impacts of colonisation over time. People with a real strong whakaaro around storytelling, around song and dance, where whānau, family, aroha and love were and still mean everything. So I'm Irish on my mum's side. My mother's maiden name is Kenny. My mother has no knowledge really of her Irish ancestry or heritage. Therefore, I have no knowledge. So that side of my whakapapa, that identity is lost. I'm Māori on my dad's side. My surname is Williams. However, my dad's surname on his birth certificate reads Weremu Te Koha. So my dad changed his surname in his 20s. And the kōrero around that kind of goes, he told my older sister that there's no kind of value in identifying as Māori, and you do much better in life if you assimilate yourself into a Pākehā world. So my dad was also of the generation that was hit and assaulted at the school by teachers for speaking Te Reo Māori, his native language, and the only language he knew and spoke at home. So in some ways, I kind of get that now. I only actually found out that my sister is my sister, which sounds a little bit strange, I'm sure. She passed away many years ago, sadly. I got to spend some time with her as a child, in my early childhood. And the story of kōrero around that always was that my older brother and my sister had the same mother, but they had different dads. So that caused significant trauma for her growing up. She was brought up by a lovely Pākehā family in a town called Bulls, very strong Christian background, very proper in every kind of way, this whānau. So she always felt like she was never obviously Pākehā enough for this family or Christian enough for this family. And then she went to school and was teased and chastised by Māori kids because she was too white for them, even though she was very dark skinned. So she never really felt like she belonged or fit in anywhere. And she ended up writing a book about this later on that was published just before her death. So that concept of death has really impacted my whānau greatly over the years. And I've lost all those significant men in my life. My dad first 24 years ago, my granddad about 16 years ago, and my older brother last year to cancer. So that's had significant impacts on my life. And I've only really been aware of it in the last couple of years. So when my older brother passed away, I went back to Whanganui. So my pepeha, you might have heard that I was raised in Whanganui, and reminisced with my younger brother about my older brother, and most of the kōrero was around the beatings and hidings he used to give us. And while I can smile about it now, I certainly didn't smile about it at the time. But I think about that, and I think about my brother, and I recall when he passed away the stories around his early years. And if you think about Nathan Wallace's first 1,000 days, my older brother's first 1,000 days were brought up in trauma with severe physical and emotional abuse. And I suspect other forms of abuse, but we're just not aware of those. So my older brother was dropped off in my dad's truck at work at the age of 2, abandoned by his biological mother. And my dad took my older brother home to my mum, who raised him as her own from there on out. My older brother was non-verbal until the age of 5, never did well at school academically, but had a real gift around statistics. So he could tell you cricket statistics and rugby league statistics, English Premier League soccer statistics, who went to which school, who played, what their weight, what their height was. He could rattle all that stuff off, but just didn't fit in at school. So life was always an uphill battle for him. My dad, who I talked about, had this long battle with cancer that lasted 24 years. He died 24 years ago. The battle with cancer lasted 4 or 5 years. And in some ways, he defied the odds, and in the end, his body gave out. So my memories of my dad growing up as a kid are generally really positive ones. I remember waking up on Saturday morning with my 2 brothers and dad cooking porridge, and we'd sit there and watch WWF wrestling that was taped the night before by dad. You know, we'd sit there in awe of Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, Jake the Snake Roberts, and Andre the Giant. I'm sure you may have heard some of those names. So if I fast forward 30 years later, I still love wrestling. And while everyone around me kind of got older and got over it, it's something that I've clung on to and loved. And my children have been through that phase with me. They've sat and watched wrestling and they got older and got over it. Now I have 2 grandkids that love wrestling, love play fighting with me as well. And they know all the catchphrases, they know all the moves, they know all the wrestlers. And it's really cool sharing that with them. But if I link that to the neuroscience, what the neuroscience says is that wrestling is my unconscious way of staying connected to my dad. So that's really been a big part of my healing process, understanding how the brain works and how the brain has helped me remember those positive memories, because my younger brother has very different memories of my dad. My younger brother has memories of my dad around abuse and my dad coming home drunk and hitting my mum. And they're not memories that I have of my dad whatsoever. So it's really, really interesting that what happens, you know, what one sibling can remember so vividly, all this abuse, another sibling may have no kind of recollection of it at all. And I kind of sat there and thought, why can't I remember this stuff? So what the neuroscience says is that trauma is not so much about what happened to you as what happened inside of you during that event. And it's so subjective and different for everyone. So what one sibling might have thought was totally fine, another sibling might have been highly sensitive to, like my younger brother, and their body and their nervous system works very differently than, say, my body and my nervous system. And for lots of us, our brain decides to block out a lot of those pleasurable and enjoyable memories. And that's what my younger brother's brain has done for him. He doesn't recall a lot of that positive stuff, but he does recall a lot of the negative stuff. So we're opposite in that respect. It's kind of like those positive memories live on the other side of a wall, just out of reach for us. So we have this part of our brain called the amygdala, and it spends 2/3 of its neurons constantly scanning for threat. And the result is that those painful and hurtful events are stored in our long-term memory much more than those pleasant, enjoyable events. So, you know, my brother and I can be brought up in the same house for 15 years, be brought up in the same bedroom, but have different memories of my dad. So just trying to share a little bit of the nervous system. So my 2 grandkids were both born in Perth. They are very, very different kids. My oldest grandson was exposed to horrible domestic violence and emotional abuse that of his mother by her partner at the time. So he came to live with us in New Zealand along with my daughter. He was 2.5 years of age when he came over here. So that's his first 1,000 days gone. His first 1,000 days lived in chaos, threat, trauma. My younger moko came to us at 6 months of age. He spent considerably less time in that traumatic environment and more time over here with a loving, consistent, stable, predictable environment with my wife and I. And now they are very, very different kids. We're starting to see with my oldest grandson the impact that having that safe, consistent, predictable environment can have after like a 3-year period, because in lots of ways from what I've seen at school and what I've seen in my life is that 3 years is significant. It's that significant time to create that strong bond and attachment with another human being. And it's something we've carried over to school. We've changed our year levels from 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6 to 1 to 3 and 4 to 6, that our kids by and large will spend 3 years with that same consistent, safe, loving, predictable adult in an environment that is also those same terms as well. So I really just wanted to share a little bit about me first, because the impact that this trauma-informed approach has had, it changed me first and foremost, not just professionally, but personally in a lot of ways. And I think for everyone on this call, like, it starts with you. you need to do the work, the personal work, and you may be aware of what that is. You may be unaware of what that is, or you may be sitting there thinking, why is this guy just talking about himself and all this stuff? And you may be here waiting for that set of bullet points or that silver bullet to fix this trauma that you're seeing in your schools or centres, or you may be looking for a matrix or a rubric or a handout to fix it. But really, it's about actually looking in the mirror and realizing what's happened to you over time and why do you do the things you do. And that's been the biggest change here. So I know a couple of years ago, we looked at this thing called growth mindset. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And to me, the biggest growth mindset change has happened through this trauma-informed approach where we've become better people first and foremost, which means we're better able to work with our kids and with our staff and with our community. So those wanting the silver bullet, I'll give it to you now. Connections, relationships, aroha. That's the answer to all of us. It always has been the answer, and it still is the answer. It's just whether you're ready to do the work or not, to kind of peel back the layers on yourself and see where you're really at. Just finally, before we move into some breakouts, I always hear people asking others, what's their why? So for me, my why is really about creating an environment where kids are seen and kids are safe, and where they don't have to put up with the same re-traumatizing, marginalizing education system that I went through as a kid, and also in lots of ways I've had to endure as an adult, as a teacher, and as a leader. So that's my why. So really, in your breakout you're going to do very soon, I want you to just to reflect on where you're kind of at in your journey, whether anything that I said, it maybe triggered you, or made you think about yourself, or maybe your partner, maybe your whānau or whānau you work with, or perhaps even colleagues you work with, that it's made you think about maybe that's why they are the way they are, or maybe something's happened to them. So if you can just spend a little bit of time in that self-reflection. So as you heard earlier, so I'm the principal of Henry Hill School, currently a Decile 1A contributing school, years 1 to 6, based in Ahuriri, Napier. The majority of our kids come from a suburb called Maraenui, which is at the high end of our deprivation index. So we're about 20 points away from clocking it as far as the school goes for funding. So our kids come from some homes where you can see the impacts of intergenerational trauma. It's a poor community, so average income per adult of just over $20,000 per annum. Life's really tough on so many levels. And I talked a little bit on my kōrero before about identity and that kind of stuff. So for me, one of the big sticking points in my life is that in lots of ways, my Māori identity was kind of stripped away from me. So that's why I love this picture you can see on the screen, because this is mana and this is identity. And it's one of the driving forces for me is making sure that these kids have every single opportunity to explore, their whakapapa. So we did 4 key things as a school to kind of change the narrative here over a number of years. This wasn't something we did in 12 months. This is really a 7-year journey. And it started with social and emotional learning at the time was the term, I guess, or the catchphrase, and has morphed into trauma-informed practice or trauma-informed approach. But to me, really, it's an awareness, and that's the key thing, really. So upskilling through professional development and improving connections with whānau, that was one of the 4 key things. And it looks like this. It started with this book here called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog by Dr. Bruce Perry, who you heard is the world's #1 expert in childhood trauma. So I read the book and was captivated by it because I could see and feel our kids in the stories. All the kids I worked with over the years, whānau I'd worked with, my own whānau in some of the stories. So I brought this back to school and I shared this with our senior leadership team, and they read the book and then they passed it on to our teachers. And it kind of went like that. It kind of morphed into our entire staff, caretaker, admin staff reading this book. And it was the conversations that came for us. People would read a chapter and they'd come to school and just talk about the story. So it wasn't anything really intentional or planned. It was really just me being excited about a book and sharing it with staff, and then they were excited about it. But then I kind of needed to learn and know more. So I joined the Neurosequential Network, which is Dr. Bruce Perry's program, so training. So I'm a certified trainer in the neurosequential model in education. It's Dr. Bruce Perry there on the right. And I talked about relationships and love being the answer. And that quote says it all from him, that relationships are the agents of change and the most powerful therapy is human love. And that comes through his books, it comes through all his mahi. And the great thing about this particular model was It was literally birthed in Aotearoa. Dr. Perry came to New Zealand about 30 years ago, brought over by the Brainwave Trust at the time, and spent time on marae, right up north in Ngāpuhi. And Kaumātua and Kuia took him around, and a lot of walking through native bush and Ngāhere. And at the time, Dr. Perry was a young doctor, and he said, well, how do you deal with depression? How do you deal with anxiety? What kind of medicine do you give your people? And Kaumātua said, well, just they pointed to different plants, and what he learned there on that marae was the concept of whakawhanaungatanga, and that people heal people. So that's very much been a big part of his approach through the years. And then his latest book, What Happened to Co-author with Oprah Winfrey, it's highlighted in the final chapter, which is literally all about his visit to New Zealand. So I learned through this model, and then every week I would bring back what I learned to our staff through professional development and literally train them. So we started to look at kids differently. We stopped using terms like behavior and realized that the trauma responses that are coming through our kids. And we started looking into what do we know about these children? What's their history? What can the whānau tell us? So it really changed the way we looked at kids, the way we talked to kids, and the way we talked about our kids. That was some of the big changes. And then we saw models like this, which is Dr. Bruce Perry's upside down brain triangle. And the biggest thing here was, because people ask us all the time, did you share all this stuff with your kids? Well, the answer is yes and no. So really how this is shared in our school is because our staff are well aware of this model and how it works. But for our kids, if an incident's happened, if something's happened, and then we've been able to regulate and calm them, when their brain goes back up to their cortex, up to the top part of the brain, the smart brain, that's the time that we can share this model with them and say, okay, when you were frustrated or angry or something happened, you move down to your brainstem. And when you're in your brainstem, you only have the ability to fight, flight, and freeze. So we've shared that with the kids. And when they're learning in the moment, like any kind of learning, you actually retain that learning. So it's not something we do in isolation. It's something we do when the time arises in the moment. So they're very well aware of this model. And this one here is really important to us as well. So Dr. Bruce Perry's stress response system. And it's really that bottom line there, the one that goes from calm to terror. And it's understanding that all our kids come into school on a particular place on that continuum. And that's kind of their baseline state entering school. It may be a different baseline state that they have at home, maybe a different baseline state that they have in the streets with their friends. But it's about understanding where our kids come in at, so we understand kind of where their trauma responses, or lack of a better word, behavior kind of moves to next. And also right up the top, that sense of time. So when you think about restorative practice, which most schools do, and it's a great approach, but it's also knowing when to kind of enter that process. So for many, many years, I'm sure I'm not the only person that's done this, kids would come in, there'd been an incident, and straight away our question as teachers or educators or principals is, why did you do that? And when a child's in that bottom part of the brain and they're frustrated, upset, angry, whatever, they have no access to the cortex, and you can see on that top part of that continuum, they kind of lose all sense of time when they move towards terror. So it's changed the way we've interacted with kids then as well. We've given them that time to calm down. We've brought in co-regulation where we might go for a walk with them. We're careful about things like proximity, making sure that we're not too close. There's this thing called the intimacy barrier, and you can be invited into a child's intimacy barrier, but that doesn't give you permission the next day to go and say, well, how are things at home now? Did anything happen overnight? So all those kind of things have really changed our relationships and connections with kids and each other. For those people that did want that silver bullet or bullet points, here they are here. The 6 R's, Bruce Perry's 6 R's. If the learning in your school and in your classrooms is relevant, rhythmic, repetitive, relational, rewarding, and respectful, kids will absolutely learn. And what's really cool, being someone who's Indigenous, being Māori and also Irish, rhythmic. It comes through dance, it comes through song. For many years we moved away from, rote learning in lots of ways. Rote learning absolutely works because the brain prefers that repetition and it prefers that rhythm. You think about your kids, whether they're primary school and shouldn't be on TikTok, or your high school kids doing TikTok, right? It's rhythmic, it's repetitive. That's why the kids are so great at it, because their brain prefers that stuff. So this has been key for our school as well. The sequence of engagement, again from Dr. Bruce Perry, that you need to regulate and calm a child when they're dysregulated, and then you need to be able to relate to them. And to be able to relate to someone, there has to be a prior connection or relationship. It's really, really hard to actually get someone to come and connect with them if there's no connection. And one of the best ways to make a connection with someone in a school is actually on the sports field, in the music room, all those things kids are into. There's a guy called Paul Dix from the UK. He has this book called When the Adult Changes, Everything Changes. And in that book, he talks about the concept of emotional currency. You only build emotional currency away from the classroom. It's really hard to build it in the classroom. So it's about finding out what their kid likes. And if that kid's into soccer, it's about getting on the field with a kid at lunchtime and kicking a ball around, just hanging out. Because every time you do that, you're actually creating and you're banking emotional currency with that child. So that later on, when shit hits the fan, you can withdraw that emotional currency and come in that regulating, relating stage. And of course, the top part of this pyramid is really reasoning that once you've calmed the child, once you've got that connection with them, then you can ask that question, what happened? But too often as adults, we ask it lower down in the bottom part of the brain, and we wonder why there's some form of dysregulation or no connection there. A really cool quote from Dr. Bruce Perry: a regulated adult can regulate a dysregulated child. So if we're calm and we're chilled out and we approach them in the right kind of manner, we're aware of our proximity, we can absolutely help calm that child down. A dysregulated adult can never regulate a dysregulated child. So if we're not calm, we have no hope in hell of calming down a child who's not calm. Kind of common sense, right? I've learned that common sense is not really that common though. And then this one here, a dysregulated adult will dysregulate a regulated child, or a dysregulated adult will dysregulate a regulated classroom. And I've seen that in practice as well. And again, I go back to that 3-year kind of period. It takes about 3 years to kind of correct and heal that rupture from children who have been in the class with dysregulated adults for all kinds of reasons, because, we all get dysregulated and overwhelmed by all kinds of stuff. So that whānau connection has been strong. So we moved away from parent interviews, 3-way conferences, student league conferences, whānau, whatever you want to call them. We moved away from them a number of years ago because it wasn't really giving us those rich connections we wanted. So we created this concept called Community Day. So we hold these once a term. It's only for an hour. So we hold them at 1 p.m. Whānau come in and learn alongside their kids and the things we care about the most here: te ao Māori, environmental sustainability and digital technology, and hands-on learning. So whānau come and learn in the space with the kids. They can bring along infants with them, so there's no barriers, there's no reason that whānau can't attend. We have men show up in our Desa 1A community, which has been really, really cool. And the outcome is for whānau that if they turn up once over those 4 terms, then they're connected. What we've found is 88.7% of our community turn up to every single opportunity. We have a connected community now. We also had a connected community when we did the conferences as well, but just not that same level of connection. Second big change as a school was making our classroom practice more relational and more regulatory. What that meant for us was beginning the school day with yoga. That's something we've been doing for 5 years now. We engaged a local yoga expert. She taught our staff. This picture here is Atiarangi, a Māori celestial compass in Ahuriri Napier. We went there as a sun come up for a staff-only day in January, learnt yoga. Tracy continued to upskill our staff through PLD. So we threw all the other curriculum stuff out the window. Let's focus on this. Tracy came and worked with our kids. Taught kind of tainer our big kids, taught our little kids. So what started as staff-led yoga became student-led yoga, and now it's all student-led in Te Reo Māori. So it's usually like a 7-minute window at the beginning of a day. Depending on the class, they may end in a pose or a yoga sequence with karakia at the end of it, or they may finish the sequence and then have a karakia together. And then we read out the role, because I've learned, I won't say we, I'll say I've learned the importance of kids being seen. That it may be the only time of the day that someone really acknowledges that child, their name, and looks at them and sees them and smiles. So I've really understood the importance of that, because it wasn't something that was important to me as a teacher. I saw it as more of a chore. We noticed through our yoga that we started doing yoga before, say, PAT formal testing to see what kind of difference it made. It made a tremendous difference to our kids' academic achievement, that they actually walked in there calm. Because in testing situations, it really shows who can access their cortex under stress. which is an incredibly hard thing to do if you're stressed, because if you're stressed, you move down to that bottom part of your brain where it's fight, flight. And for most people in an exam situation, freeze. Regulatory brain breaks as well. You may know them better as brain gym. So we do those. Crossing that midline of the body is really important to fire those axons and neurons across the brain. Third change is making sure our environment is more responsive and more regulatory. It looks like this, creating spaces. So it's kind of, this space here is about 4 classroom longs. We call it the quiet place. It's literally our school's response to a friendship seat or a buddy chair. Because in my experience at schools, it's another re-traumatizing place for children because there is that potential for there to be bullying. So in our space, there's no stigma attached. It's just a place to chill, is how we've sold that concept to our kids. So elements of nature there, because nature is highly regulating as well. So that's a quite well-used space. So at morning tea and lunchtime, kids chill out there. There's no ball tag. There's no running around and screaming. You've got the rest of the school to do that. But in this space, it's a chill out space. Te Ahuru Moai, which is our school sensory garden, which is literally just recycled materials and reused and repurposed materials, mainly made by students and by staff. Pool noodles are great. Cut them in half, chop them in thirds. Feels really nice to walk on top of. We have opposite kind of features. We have scoria in there, which doesn't feel as nice to walk on. So lots of different textures for children to walk on, to be grounded with Papa Tuanuku. So staff putting, you see some acorns there. There's some eco bricks, which are literally just plastic bottles filled with trash. Lots of different textures and materials. Our kids interacting with the space. And the fourth and final kind of concept is sharing that kaupapa. So once we knew some stuff, we felt like we just had to share it. So at an assembly, sharing brain breaks with our community. You can see at the back of the hall there in the picture. Connecting with someone like Nathan Wallace, and then him putting our sensory garden on his social media, which blew up real huge. And then we were inundated with the requests for how do we do this at our school, which was really, really cool. Being published in the Education Gazette, being able to share that story further, and to be able to use words like trauma-informed in a Ministry of Education document. That's no small feat, trust me. Being published in school news as well, being able to continue to share that story to hopefully motivate other people, inviting other people into our space to see what we do in action, giving our staff an opportunity to get up and share this approach as well. So it's not just me, because they're trained in the same model. They're the ones in the classroom, affecting this real change in our school. Go to Parliament to share this approach with the Associate Minister of Education, Jan Tinetti, and then Jan visiting us at school and seeing it in practice, and seeing her in tears along one of her teachers sharing the progress of one of the kids in her class was very powerful to see. Winning the Prime Minister's Education Excellence Award and Wellbeing was really, really cool. But the motivation around that was really about sharing this kaupapa, because we knew it was making a difference here, but we weren't really sure how to put it out there. So this really helped in that regard, gave us some validity, I guess, to an unknown approach or something, the term trauma, which kind of triggers or creates fear in some people. Sharing this kaupapa further at a conference in June here in Napier, where Dr. Bruce Perry keynoted virtually with hundreds of people there present. And then I guess the key thing for us is our men's and women's hui, which we hold once a month as a place of therapeutic healing with our men and our women, where we share our real life stories and try and blend in some neuroscience and getting them to understand the reasons why we do the things we do. So that's kind of what we've done here over time, and it's made such a massive difference to the learning of our kids, to our community, and it's made a humongous difference to staff. The staff that come consistently to these hui have such a different connection and relationship with each other now, and we really understand each other better and ourselves better. So when we move into these breakouts, I guess I want you to think about, has there been something you've heard that's affirmed something you're doing in your space? Are there some ideas you think are pretty cool that you may take away and use in your space? And perhaps there's something that you've seen that you like, but you're not sure how you can implement that in your space, but there may be someone in your breakout group that's already doing it or has some ideas. So it'd be cool to see that all happening. It's just while you're doing that, here are some really awesome books. Ones I highly recommend. So She Is Not Your Rehab by Matt and Sarah Brown, who are from Ōtautahi, Christchurch. Really, really sad story, but uplifting at the same time. Made a massive difference personally to me. I read the book and I connected to so much in it without actually having going through that stuff. It was quite an emotional read. Probably not something you read before bedtime though, but definitely a must read for anyone that works with people. The Boy Who's Raised His Dog, I'd already talked about. The book What Happened to You, Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, which is literally just a conversation between two people where Oprah shares her real life trauma and Dr. Perry kind of comes back with the neuroscience behind the why. How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LaPera. So she is known as the holistic psychologist on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, you may have seen lots of her posts, but really, really powerful stuff from her. And next to that, a book by Dr. Gabor Mate, which has only come out in the last couple of months. And he's kind of all over social media promoting it now as well. So you can catch him on YouTube. But really powerful books. And in these books here, The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. So it really talks about what happens inside the body when people are affected by trauma. When the adult changes, everything changes, which I already talked about by Paul Dix. Really cool ideas, especially if you're in leadership here. Lots of cool stuff about how you can make changes in your school. My Grandmother's Hands is a book about intergenerational trauma that is incredibly powerful. And they tell the stories of white trauma, which is white Americans that immigrated from Europe to America many years ago. Black trauma, so Black Americans that were brought over as slaves many years ago. And then blue trauma, which is the white male American policeman. So once, I had all kinds of preconceived notions about the blue trauma until I read the book and absolutely changed my perception of what it must be like being a policeman and coming face to face with some of the situations they do each day. I didn't start with you, which is also around intergenerational trauma, and on the far right, Beyond Behaviors by Dr. Mona Delahooke. Her kind of catchphrase and what she's known for right now is toddlers don't throw tantrums, tantrums throw toddlers. So once you get your head around that, if it's something you think you'd be interested in too, it's definitely a really good read.